Alright, my second talk is on how we actually, more like the methods of the surveys that we do. I mean, I'm not going to go into a huge discussion, but a little bit. I first wanted to say that in the United States we have the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which is our Fisheries Act, Saltwater Fisheries Act, and that's pretty much what guides NOAA fisheries and all we do. And in that act, there's a requirement to do socioeconomic research when you're doing different management policies. So I don't know if there's a similarity in different countries in Europe, but having that gives us a reason to be able to get money to do these surveys. And that doesn't mean we have enough money, it just means we have some money. So let me just go into what I'm going to talk about. I'll talk about why do we do economic analysis, a brief introduction to two of the type of surveys that we do. I'm going to give you a little bit more background on the economic impact analysis, and then I'm going to talk about a new exciting survey we're doing this year on, as we mentioned, bait and tackle shops in the U.S. So we actually don't collect that information regularly. This is a first-time survey for us. All right. So what kind of questions can economic analysis answer? I know you know some of this, but it's good to think about the wide range of things we can answer. So first of all, we can look at people's behavior. I mean, that's what economics is really, the study of people's behavior and the choices they make under scarce resources, right? So first of all, what influences participation in the fishery? You know, what factors, both the anglers and the fishery, make people want to fish there? What characteristics of an angler or fishing site influence the number of trips taken by the angler and where to fish? And then what is the value of the fishery? Again, like I mentioned yesterday, value, people use it kind of loosely, but economists have a very specific definition for value. It's not economic impact, so just, people always confuse those. And the value is like the amount people are their willingness to pay above and beyond what they actually spend. We can compare that value to like the profits in the commercial fishing. So you don't want to compare impacts and say that you're going to reallocate fish based on impacts. That's one factor, but that's not an efficiency in terms of economic efficiency, which is what we have to do when we're actually changing regulations. And what types of management measures are preferred by anglers? Do they like bag limits, season closures, size limits? We can analyze these things too by our economic surveys. Then the question we talked about earlier, what are anglers spending and on what and how much do they spend? Where? What is the economic contribution or impact of the fishery to coastal communities? How may regulatory actions impact both the consumers and the producers? So that like the commercial fishermen, the recreational fishermen, for instance, the people who buy. I mean, because we do commercial fisheries analysis too, not me personally, but some of our economists do. So this is general to both rec and commercial. And how do we incorporate ecosystem management into fisheries? So there's a wide variety of uses for economic analysis. So some of the types of surveys gather data on angler characteristics, their income, their age, the number of trips they take, their years of fishing experience. We like to look at characteristics of the particular trip they took, the location, the mode of fishing, like that's for hire, private boat, shore. What species were they targeting? How far did they travel? This is how far they travel gives us a cost of the trip that we use to go in our economic models and then value the fishery. Take a value of the fishery. What are their preferences over management options, like I said before? And we do these by slightly different surveys. We do something called a random utility model that looks at where people go fishing and the characteristics of that trip to get a value for the trip. And then we can use that and people change their number of trips if the management measures might change. So we can get a value from that. We also do what we call contingent valuation or conjoint surveys, which present people with a series of hypothetical choices over different kinds of trips. And by making those choices, then we can also get a value of the fishery because we give them, along with the type of trip, like is it a for-hire trip that goes for this species and you can catch this much, a value, a cost of that trip. And we use that cost information, the amount they're paying the charter captain, for instance, that varies among the different alternatives to get this value out of the trip. So sometimes we can't use what we call this revealed preference approach, looking at where people actually went to look at something like a change in bag limits, because there might not be a bag limit right now, so we have to do a hypothetical because we can't see what's actually happening because there is no bag limit yet. And so the valuation models are used for benefit cost analysis. Again, this is the efficiency analysis, not the impact analysis. Looking at the value for another fish caught or a value for that trip. We can predict people's reactions to management and stock changes. We understand how anglers view trade-offs between species. If we reduce the ability to catch red snapper in the Gulf, will they target something else instead, or will they just stop fishing? Okay, so those are the kinds of questions we want to answer. How about evaluating different changes like the bag limit, season length, size limits, things like that. You can also look at dam removal. That's another benefit cost analysis we could do. And then you could look at natural resource damage assessments after the fact, like the BP oil spill in the Gulf. What was the lost value to anglers from not being able to fish for 2 months? Or like Hurricane Sandy, for instance, we did some analysis with that. All right, so on the expenditure surveys and the impact models, in order to do these economic impact models, you have to do the expenditure survey first. So, like I said, every 5 years we've been doing this. In 2011, we collected expenditures on fishing trips and related equipment, that's the durable equipment. We looked at it by different types of fishing, and we looked at it, as I said before, resident and non-resident spending. And we use this to get an idea of how that expenditure, say in Florida, contributes to jobs in Florida. And like I said, you could use this kind of information to say, well, if the community builds a new fishing pier, how will sales or jobs be affected in that local community? And then broader questions. So in the U.S. in 2011, $4.4 billion was spent in trip expenditures, and here's how it broke out by mode. Private boat mode expenditures are the highest, $2 billion. Shore, 1.5, and for hire, $1 billion. So for hire can be, the for hire operators can be very vocal in some places, especially in places like Florida and the Gulf where there's a lot of for hire operation. But across the country, they're the smallest of the expenditures. And people spend, there's a lot of people who do shore fishing, but they don't always spend as much money because they can just walk, they don't have hotels necessarily or a lot of gas. But boat fuel in the private boat category is a big one. Okay, so this is just a very brief introduction to economic impact analysis. Basically what you're doing is when that angler buys something, that money goes to the store owner, and then he buys things from other stores, and the people who work there buy things, and so it kind of flows through all the intermediate suppliers, and then how does it go through taxes and households and their personal consumption decisions and industry. So by knowing the final demand, you can trace all the intermediate effects throughout the economy. And like I said before, we have a great thing called Implan in the U.S. that these guys have put together, and we can just buy that and run that software. We don't have to put the actual impact model together and have all that underlying data. If you don't have that for your country, then you're at a huge disadvantage trying to get this kind of information. So hopefully some economist in your country has put this together and that you can use it. What happened there? You don't see this? It should show up. I'm not sure why it's not. So there's different types of contributions in impact analysis. There's the sales, or what we call the output. That's the sales by businesses in a region. There's the value added, the amount contributed to GDP above and beyond what it costs to produce that thing. And then there's employment. And then we also can look at income, which I didn't mention here, but we can look at the income generated by that individual sales. Now, output is not the same as expenditures. They're slightly different because of all that intermediate impact. So in expenditure, say you had $1 million in Florida from anglers' expenditures, the impacts could be $2 million because of running through the economy. Or they could be less if a lot of the goods the anglers are buying are imported into Florida and the impacts actually flow outside the region that you're looking for. So it could be more or less. Here's a map of the U.S. Results from 2011 for the output, and you can see how impacts are distributed across the different coastal states.
Can you please put that?
In general, where there's higher expenditures, there's higher impacts, but it's not always the case because of this import thing in different states. So Florida, Texas, California, North Carolina come out pretty high. And the same patterns are evident for the jobs too. So a lot of jobs in Florida, it's basically the Gulf region, and in California and Texas. All right, so this year we are working with ASA, which is American Sport Fishing Association, who've been wanting us to do a survey of bait and tackle shops for a while now. This year we happen to have some extra money, so we're putting together the first national survey of bait and tackle stores in the coastal states and large national chains such as Bass Pro or Dick's Sporting Goods. You're familiar with the Cabela's out of Nebraska. We're going to try to field this in the summer. A bunch of the industry groups like ASA, who represent the tackle manufacturers in the U.S., have said they really need this information because when regulations go into effect, they know there's some kind of impact on the bait and tackle shops. They just don't know what that is. And so when they, let's say, the last time they were talking about red snapper in the Atlantic, and they were going to close the season, they wanted to go to the Fisheries Council, South Atlantic Council meeting and say, this is the impact on our tackle shops, but they really didn't have any numbers. So, of course, if you don't have any numbers, then it's hard to decide what to do. So they kept saying, we really need this information, and we're in a position this year to be able to try to fix that. So what we did was collected, there is no list of tackle shops across the country because they're not permitted, like you don't have to have a fishing permit to run them. But luckily, where a lot of fishing licenses are sold are tackle shops. So we were able to add all the different states for their list of fishing license vendors and start with that. And then we augmented that by going to ASA and this company called Big Rock Sports, which is a distributor of wholesale tackle, and they gave us their list. So between those two, we put together a list of what we think are the majority of bait and tackle shops serving saltwater fishing. And I should qualify, we're trying to just get the ones that are doing saltwater fishing, not primarily freshwater, around the coastal states. And we're going to mail out a survey that's 4 pages that asks a couple different questions, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the hope is that we'll understand this business sector a little bit more in detail to understand how they might be impacted by future changes in fishery policies. And we can use those results, again, in implant and come out with economic analysis of the bait and tackle sector. So what are we going to ask them? We want to know what their revenues are for 2013. We're asking for the year in advance because we need a whole year. And we want to give, first we want to ask them what's your gross revenue for everything that you sold, including freshwater fishing, hunting, whatever you sell in the shop. But then what percentage of that is for bait and tackle, and then what percentage of that is for saltwater tackle? Because we really just want to know about saltwater related stuff. We're going to ask them their costs, like inventory, labor, wages, basically any costs they have, because what we want to do eventually is figure out what the profit that they're making is. And then we added some questions on what they think in terms of fisheries related stuff is influencing their sales. So are regulations causing issues? Is it the general downturn or upturn in the economy? What things are business? And what types of fish, saltwater fish, do your customers target? Now, we don't know that all of them are going to be able to answer these questions, but we've talked to a few of them around the country, and they say that, especially if they're a small shop, they know what people are trying to catch. Some of these shops are right on the coast, like in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, so they only target saltwater anglers. So those are easy, but the bigger chains are going to be much more difficult to try to figure out. We're going to do the best we can. And so we've got a lot of industry support. We've been going to meetings with ASA, and like I said, this guy from Big Rock Sports, the CEO, has given us his approval. We're actually going to have an article in Fishing Tackle Retailer in the July issue, which is right before ICAST, which is a big, huge tackle show in Florida in the summer. And all the tackle manufacturers and shops tend to go to that, so we're really trying to get them to participate. But since we've never done this, we really have no idea what the response rate is going to be. But so far, we've gotten a lot of good feedback. And we hope to have the results out sometime in the fall.
keep it anonymous.
Oh yeah, so, well, obviously we have to know their store's name to send the survey to them. But then when we collect all the data, we remove it. So a lot of the stores have concerns about privacy. And first we wanted to just say write in the amount of revenue that you have. But then they didn't like that, so we had to go to categories like between 100,000 and 200,000 and stuff. So that made it better for them, so that they're not telling us exactly what they make. It's easier for us if they tell us exactly, but this will be a rough estimate. Yeah.
How are you dealing with well, certainly in the UK, there's a big move towards internet-based sales, and
oh yeah, so we have a question about that. We say what percent is internet sales of your stuff? But a lot of these places are small shops, so they don't do internet sales. There's a few, like Captain Harry's in Florida, that does a big one. A lot of internet sales, but for the most part, we don't think that's a big deal yet.
okay.
But we do ask a question about that. Yeah.
You mentioned the slot limits and bag limits. That is something that we're looking at in Denmark now. We've mostly been looking at it biologically, but do you have data on the economic impact of using these regulations as opposed to not, or something else? Or
Well, we have studies from different parts of we don't have a comprehensive thing across the U.S. because it's so different depending on the species and stuff. But the science centers, we have regional science centers, they do, when there's regulations like that, they'll do an analysis and they'll say, we predict the number of trips will change by this much, and then we'll stick that change into the economic impact analysis and try to get some results. So, yeah, so I should mention that there's the office in the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, which is in Woods Hole. There's the Southeast Fisheries Science Center in Miami. There's the Southwest in La Jolla, California. There's the Northwest in Seattle, the Alaska region, which is actually in Seattle. And then we have our headquarters office, which is where I am. So these different regional offices, they'll often be the ones to do the surveys on a specific regulation that's going on, because everything is regionalized. So all the regulations come out of a regional basis. So if you have questions and you want specific information, just email me. It's too hard to get into it all. But we have some wonderful economists who would be, I'm sure, more than happy to be invited to Europe again. I know they're all jealous of me coming. So, yeah.
Did you say that you use a combination of stated and revealed preferences?
I'm sorry to hear you.
Did you say that you use a combination of stated and revealed preferences?
Yes, we do.
Do you have
not always in the same analysis?
in the evaluation study?
Yeah. So yeah, we do a lot of. We're moving more towards stated preference, which is this contour stuff where you ask the hypothetical questions. In fact, we just finished one that I was involved with the guy from Miami, David Carter, where we're asking questions about for-hire trips in the Gulf on red snapper and grouper and king mackerel, I think, is the other species that we're looking at. We just finished collecting that, so we're going to start analyzing it. There's also a survey that's going on in the Northeast this year on cod, haddock. Scott Steinbeck's running that one. And then the guys in Alaska are doing some really good work on Alaskan alphabet. Dan Liu from the Alaska Science Center is an expert in stated preference.
And I missed a technical question. Did you also the questionnaires you submitted in the paper shop? Did you do it in the interview?
The bait tackle survey? It's a mail survey.
Is it online or?
No, it's only mail. Mail survey. Yeah. For one reason is because the list that those states gave us, we really just have the address of the store. We don't have any email addresses. We have telephone numbers too, but what we're going to do is we're going to mail out a letter saying that the survey will be coming in a week, and then they'll get the survey packet, and if they don't respond right away, they get a postcard reminder, then they get another copy of the survey, and then we have some money set aside to do calls if they haven't responded after like 3 weeks. But we didn't want to do an internet survey because it's pretty expensive, and when we did option for internet in 2011, the expenditure survey, it wasn't worth the money. People didn't really, it was a better response rate to the mail than to the internet part.
How was the return?
For what? For which survey?
Paper shop.
No, we haven't done it yet. We're getting ready to do it, yeah. So we just got approval from the Office of Management budget, and we're working with the contractor to finalize everything. We expect to mail out like in July. But it'll be a one-time mailing. I mean, it'll be 4 mailings to the same person, but we're not doing waves of mailing over the year.
It seems that the government already has a lot of this information. I mean, all these tackle shops pay taxes.
Yeah, but the IRS doesn't give us the
Exactly.
information, so we have to do our own.
Silly in
Yeah.
that sense, like the information's there, but you can't get
And
it.
we thought about that, but it's nearly impossible to get that kind of stuff from the IRS, yeah.
I was just wondering, in Sweden, I mean, the small tackle shops and that are almost being swept away by a tsunami of internet sales. And it's direct to China, it's AliExpress and that, it's not Swedish internet companies at all. Is there any way you can sort of get that sort of information through tax or tax and excise or anything you haven't thought about? Is that a problem in America or not? All
Doesn't
those sort
seem
of
to be a
direct
big
sales?
problem yet.
Okay.
I mean, these lists of stores that sell the licenses are quite extensive in some states, so it seems like there's still a lot of mom and pop shops.
Yeah.
And the other thing we did is there's all these, like I said, ICAST in July. There's a bunch of these fishing and boat shows around the country that start in January before fishing and boating season starts. And the guy I'm working with, Cliff Hutt, has already been to one in New Jersey, one in North Carolina. So we've kind of been going from, these shows to try to meet the people who own the shops and be able to publicize the survey. And also, we are asking them their feedback on the questions, which is why we changed one of those questions, to make sure that once they get it, they're able to answer all the questions. We're not going to do a formal pre-test, but we're kind of doing these informal focus group things by calling these tackle shops and talked to a few of them already.
Thank you, Sabrina, and we will take more questions during.
Yeah.